Dear colleagues, good morning and welcome all to the second day of the TBT week. As you have seen in the annotated draft agenda circulated in Job TBT 518, we will proceed today with two very interesting thematic sessions. The focus of this morning's thematic session will be on the use of digital technologies and tools in good regulatory practices. And it will be moderated by Diego Franco from Paraguay. And this afternoon's session will focus on conformity assessment and e-commerce. And it will be moderated by Dora Trofor from the UK. I'd like to recall that members had agreed on these topics for the thematic sessions in the context of the 9th triennial review concluded in November 21. Just a few housekeeping matters. Both of the sessions today are being held in hybrid mode with a possibility to connect virtually via Zoom. And the sessions are also open to public viewing on YouTube. For those of you who are joining online, I'd like to confirm that you can access the interpretation services in English, French, and Spanish by clicking on the globe button on your Zoom screen. Before we head into the thematic discussion, just a brief reminder to delegations that about the EPING walk-in session on Thursday 9th at 2 o'clock in person. So please be there if you're interested to learn more about EPING. So colleagues, these thematic sessions provide a great opportunity for you to share experiences, post questions, and engage with each other in a more informal mode. So I would very much like to encourage you all to participate actively and make the most of it. We have a full agenda today and for the rest of the week, so without further ado, I would like to hand over to Diego, the moderator of our morning session, and also just to thank both moderators for having taken on the responsibility for these sessions. Diego, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes, thank you, Anna, and thank you, colleagues, for being here. I will make use of all WTO official languages and do this bit in Spanish, if you don't mind. The interpreters already have the notes, so they'll follow. So, buenos días y bienvenidos a esta sesión temática sobre el uso de tecnologías y herramientas digitales en las buenas prácticas de reglamentación. Soy Diego Franco, de la misión de Paraguay, encargado, entre otros temas, de obstáculos técnicos al comercio, y seré el moderador de este panel. Hace tiempo, como saben, el comité se interesa en este tema tan importante y cambiante de las buenas prácticas de reglamentación. De hecho, a lo largo de los años, el comité ha debatido diversos aspectos de las BPR. El intercambio de experiencias entre los miembros se centró en cuestiones como la elección de los instrumentos de política, el uso de las evaluaciones del impacto normativo para facilitar las buenas prácticas regulatorias de reglamentación, la integración de las BPR en las estructuras normativas de los miembros y las BPR en los acuerdos comerciales y muchas otras. En el quinto examen trienal, los miembros reconocieron que las BPR pueden contribuir a una aplicación mejorada y eficaz del acuerdo OTC y pueden contribuir a evitar obstáculos innecesarios al comercio en la preparación, adopción y aplicación de medidas reglamentarias. Los miembros también reafirmaron la importancia de una coordinación eficaz de las políticas internas, incluso entre los reguladores, los organismos de normalización y los funcionarios de comercio que aplican el acuerdo OTC. En el octavo examen trienal, los miembros debatieron los beneficios de las BPR, como en la forma en que estas ayudan a garantizar que las regulaciones sean de alta calidad y rentables, y también sean compatibles con el comercio abierto. Los miembros también señalaron que las BPR contribuyen al establecimiento de un marco común predecible para la intervención reguladora, que a su vez facilita la cooperación y la armonización reguladora mundial. En la novena revisión trienal, que es la más reciente, también incluye recomendaciones relacionadas con las BPR, a saber, examinar los procedimientos y los procesos existentes en los miembros para garantizar que las autoridades de reglamentación tengan en cuenta las obligaciones del acuerdo OTC a elaborar reglamentos técnicos y sobre la base de estos debates a considerar la necesidad de seguir trabajando en el comité sobre este tema. Y finalmente a celebrar una sesión temática anual sobre BPRs, tal y como recomendó ya la 8ª revisión trienal y una de las reuniones, la de este año, es la que estamos celebrando hoy. Muchas de nuestras notificaciones y preocupaciones comerciales específicas abordaron normativas sobre o relacionadas con riesgos y retos derivados de las tecnologías digitales transformadoras como la IA. En las sesiones temáticas de junio, los miembros intercambiaron experiencias sobre este tipo de medidas, al discutir productos digitales intangibles y ciberseguridad. Sin embargo, es importante señalar que en lugar de ser únicamente objeto de regulaciones, estas tecnologías también pueden ser facilitadores de mejores intervenciones y marcos reguladores. Este punto de vista se abordó en la sesión temática de marzo del 2022, concretamente en relación con las soluciones digitales para los procedimientos de evaluación de la conformidad. Y en la misma línea, la sesión temática de esta mañana explorará cómo el uso de tecnologías y herramientas digitales puede ayudar a diseñar y aplicar diversas BPR, y como resultado, contribuir a la aplicación mejorada y eficaz del acuerdo OTC. También exploraremos cómo los miembros innovan y utilizan las tecnologías y herramientas digitales para gestionar el proceso de reglamentación y cómo dichas herramientas pueden aumentar la inclusividad y la eficacia del proceso de reglamentación. Los detalles de esta sesión, así como las presentaciones de los oradores, ya están disponibles en la página web dedicada en el portal OTC de la OMC. Me gustaría recordar que contar en lo posible con las presentaciones antes de las sesiones temáticas y las preguntas guías son algunas de las mejoras que en el marco de este comité solicitamos y que fueron incluidas al procedimiento del comité para las sesiones temáticas, como un mecanismo para alentar la participación de los miembros, no solo a través de la presentación de oradores, que se agradece, sino también para tener un diálogo más fluido con los que participan en la sala o a través de las herramientas digitales. En primer lugar, para esta sesión invitaré a los oradores a que hagan sus presentaciones introductorias y aborden algunas o todas las preguntas guías que acompañan a esta sesión y que leeré en español para que tengamos frescas en la memoria. Las preguntas son: ¿cómo pueden las tecnologías y herramientas digitales ayudar a aplicar buenas prácticas de reglamentación, en particular en lo que respecta a la mejora de la transparencia, la inclusividad y la eficiencia del proceso de reglamentación? ¿Cómo pueden cooperar los miembros en relación con la aplicación de herramientas y tecnologías digitales en el proceso de reglamentación? ¿Cuáles son las dificultades y las posibles soluciones para que los países en desarrollo, en particular los PMA, puedan utilizar esas herramientas y tecnologías digitales en sus procesos de reglamentación? Luego de cada presentación, pretendo ofrecer brevemente la palabra a los participantes en sala o en línea, en caso de que existan algunas preguntas específicas a esa presentación. Y al final de las presentaciones, de todas las presentaciones, me gustaría abrir un debate más general con la participación activa de las delegaciones. A modo recordatorio, como ya mencionó nuestra presidenta, aquellos que se unan a través de Zoom podrán solicitar virtualmente la palabra y hacer preguntas. Pasando a las presentaciones de hoy, me gustaría pasar en inglés a presentar a nuestros oradores. El primero sería Mr. Jordan Hatch, Acting First Assistant Secretary, Regulatory Reform from the Regulatory Reform Division at the Australian Government Department of Finance. Will present on the use of digital tools in regulatory policy to ensure that it remains fit for purpose in the digital era. Mr. Hatch will be presenting online.
Hello. I'm just going to go ahead and share my presentation, so hopefully the technology will hold up and hopefully you can see that there on the screen. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to the group today on the question of how can digital technologies and tools help in implementing good regulatory practice. My name is Jordan Hatch. I'm currently the Acting First Assistant Secretary leading the Regulatory Reform Division in the Australian Government Department of Finance. I thought today I'll just give a brief introduction about the role of our function in regulatory reform and some of the areas that we're looking at, but then provide 3 examples of how we've been applying digital technologies, in particular digital era ways of working in approaching regulatory problems in a different way. So just by way of background, the Regulatory Reform Division is a team of around 40 policy and technical experts that sits in the finance ministry in the centre of the Australian government. And we sit alongside our colleagues responsible for digital reform and digital policy, including digital identity, and also public service reform. So we're very much connected with our colleagues who work on both those broad reform areas. And we have a remit that works across our federal government agencies, states and territories, because Australia is a federation, and with our international colleagues, both in forums like this and also bilaterally with like-minded partners. And we have three broad focus areas of our work. We're really interested in how do we build more strategic and cohesive regulatory policy, particularly looking at what are the right guardrails that ought to exist around the way we approach regulation, particularly when we're looking at the use of digital and technology. We're looking a lot at building mature regulatory practice and performance across a wide range of regulators. And we're also looking a lot at how do regulators make more effective use of technology in realizing the regulatory outcomes. So to that end, I'll talk today about three examples of digital practices that make use of technology in approaching complex cross-cutting regulatory issues. The first I'll talk to is human-centered design. The second is looking at system-wide mapping. And the third is multidisciplinary collaboration. So for human-centered design, this is a practice that if you've worked in digital teams, particularly looking at how many digital teams in the private sector operates, it's a very well-established practice for having quite concentrated engagement with users to understand pain points, opportunities, and really testing potential either regulatory approaches or digital and technology implementation approaches with the people who are destined to be the end users. Now in Australia, we've been looking this year at the role of worker screening in the care and support sector. And so this covers a broad range of occupations such as childcare, aged care, disability care, where there's a series of checking processes which need to exist to be able to attest to the character of somebody who might work in one of these in an industry with potentially vulnerable care recipients. So we have quite complex, for good reason, procedures which can ensure people are fit to work in an industry, but these do vary because of the way that Australia is a federation. So we've been doing some work this year to help understand how these processes could be better joined up, can better protect care recipients in Australia, but also make it easier for people who've been assessed to be eligible to work in one sector to be able to more easily move across the country to other states and territories and maintain their check, or to be able to work across different occupations where there might be different regulatory schemes. So one of the things we were really keen to do as part of this process was to actually get out and talk to real people, to talk to the care workers who have to go through these processes, and to talk to the employers who have legal obligations to make sure that their workers have been checked. So we went on the road. We worked with a design partner to go across Australia, and we spoke to 17 care workers and 12 employers. And as part of that process, we would sit down one-to-one with a worker or an employer, understanding both some of the pain points they experience, but also the context in which they'd be approaching applying for a check or validating a worker. And we did that particularly because it gives us breadth around the nature of the problem. It helps us identify challenges and opportunities, and it's really helped us to build a really good evidence base for potential reform pathways. The second, to go to system-wide mapping, we spent a lot of time this year supporting an independent review into health worker regulatory settings of health workers migrating to Australia, where some of the issues are born of compounding regulatory frameworks which overlap and don't reflect the necessarily the role that an individual potential migrant worker might come to might go through on the process of coming to Australia. So in approaching this issue, we worked with a number of different Commonwealth agencies in the federal government to identify what the existing processes were and map them on a single diagram. So you could start to see where there might be duplicative processes and where particularly certain checks. So for example, criminal history checks were being asked at multiple points in that journey, but only by laying them out on the same map and having that as a collaborative process with a number of different regulators, sometimes federal regulators and sometimes in states and territories. Can you start to draw out where those points of commonality might be, and to be able to use that as a way to seek agreement to remove that duplication. And then finally, to multidisciplinary collaboration. This year we've been working with a number of agencies in the federal government to digitize a process we have called a statutory declaration, which is a sort of solemn document that you can use for a wide range of purposes where you need to make a statement that's truthful. And this is a process which has been born in legislation for 50 years. And so to provide an option to sign those documents digitally without having to see a human witness face-to-face to watch you sign the document requires quite significant changes to the law. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that the technology that would implement that new process could be delivered simultaneously, so we could make sure the legislation could meet the technology needs and the technology could inform and then be guided by the legislation. So rather than perhaps a traditional process where we might design the legislation up front and then after a number of steps in the process sort of hand it over to a technology team to deliver it, we actually brought the two teams together. And over the course of a couple of weeks, the joint team of policy and legislative colleagues and technology specialists and design specialists built a prototype which illustrated how the user experience might work, but was also used to test that the policy proposals and the potential legislative pathway would be valid and would actually stand up to the scrutiny that we're putting through the process. And the result of this was that we had a real prototype, and there's a picture of it here on this slide. But also it meant that the next stages from that prototype being created all the way through to legislation being tabled in the Parliament was really quite rapid, because there was this really strong shared understanding between several agencies as to how the ideal state for this would be implemented. So those are three examples there: human-centered design, system-wide mapping, and multidisciplinary collaboration. I'll pause there. Really happy to take questions, and we also have some information more about our regulatory reform journey on our website.
Thank you, Mr. Hatch. It's actually very interesting how these digital tools can help with these processes and make it more fit for purpose. I would like to now open the floor either in the room or online if there are any specific questions for this presentation. Otherwise, you can jump in the end in the general Q&A section. Doesn't seem to be the case, so let's move. No, sorry. So let's move to the next presentation, which I would like to invite Ms. Bridget Dooling, Assistant Professor of Law in Michael E. Moritz College of Law, The Ohio State University in the United States, to explain how new technology tools can be used in the regulatory process. She will also be presenting online. Thank you.
Hello, greetings to everyone. I'm glad to be with you here today. I'm just going to work on sharing my screen. 1 second. All right. I thought I might start with a little bit of introduction so you know who you are talking to. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, but not in presentation mode.
Forgive me. You'd think we'd all be
Now we
great
can
at
see.
this by now.
Now we can see.
Okay, good. All right, good. Thank you for your patience. All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's really my honor to present to this body of thinkers and representatives who strive to make good regulatory practices the norm. I'll introduce myself so you know where I'm coming from. I am an assistant professor at Ohio State's School of Law, but my background is that of a civil servant. So I was in the United States government for over 10 years, reviewing draft regulations before they were released to the public in an office called OIRA, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So I'm going to talk mostly from the US perspective in light of my experience, but one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here is to learn more from the other presenters as well as from the folks who will ask questions. So I will begin by saying, maybe this is obvious, but in the United States, rulemaking generates a lot of text, both in terms of regulatory text, that is the language that actually becomes the binding law, and the explanations from agencies where they describe the choices that they're making and why. And we know that generative AI is a set of tools that can be very good at producing a lot of text. So the natural question for me, as I have seen new Gen AI tools emerging over the last couple of years, is what might these tools mean for rulemaking? So I'll talk about that, but also about some other emerging technologies and the rulemaking process. So today I'd like to organize my talk by thinking about who might use tech tools related to regulation. So I'll talk about the public's use of tech tools, the way agencies might use them, how the e-rulemaking program itself can take advantage of them, and then also how the courts might think about using tools such as generative AI and what that might mean for regulators. But first, a quick sign that the United States is paying attention to this at high levels, or at least that's what it looked like to me, is that the president gave direction to OIRA, my old office, to consider guidance or tools to modernize the notice and comment process, including, and this is important for us today, through technological changes. Those reforms might include guidance or tools to address mass comments, computer-generated comments, such as those generated by artificial intelligence, and falsely attributed comments. So I'll talk about each of those today, not least because the United States has direction to work on that as a policy matter. Okay, so let's start with the public. There's a couple of ways that the public might be able to take advantage of some tech tools. The first is to help them become more aware of regulations that might be of interest to them. So you might imagine a tool that helps connect individuals to regulations that they are interested in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to sign up for the right mailing list or know which websites to navigate, which can be really overwhelming. Perhaps you could imagine a tool that instead takes advantage of the user's information or the person's browsing history or something that they have allowed this app to study, essentially. So learning, what this person is actually interested in, and then prompting that person to let them know that a regulation that they might be interested in is being worked on, to give them a chance to participate in it. Another way that that tech tools might be useful is in, and this is where we'll get into the role of generative AI, is in actually helping to draft comments. So in the US system, it's okay to send comments in almost any written format. So that leads to a really wide range of formatting and structuring of comments from the public. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also probably true that some comments are more helpful or persuasive to an agency, because writing comments can be a little bit of an art. But we know that generative AI is really good at mimicking certain forms of text. So perhaps a member of the public could use AI, generative AI, to draft a comment. And at the end of my presentation, I have some links for you. I hope you can access the slides themselves. If not, you can always contact me at Ohio State. There are some links there, and there's a paper that I wrote with a colleague called Robotic Rulemaking, in which my colleague actually tried to use generative AI. I think we used ChatGPT to try to generate a draft comment, and it looked pretty good in terms of the structure and the form, and how it felt. Did it feel like a comment? It absolutely did. So an agency could perhaps build a tool for the public to use to structure their comments, to provide information that the agency can really make use of. And so in the US, that means moving beyond mere opinion and getting into the person's reasons for their opinions. Why do they support the regulation, or why don't they support the regulation? It could really, and I'm going to take the posture of an optimist, it could really help provide additional richness to comments that are otherwise not likely to strongly influence an agency. One related aspect of this is how this ties into mass and malattributed comments. Generative AI can really take these phenomena to the next level. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A if you'd like. But the basic idea is that, once you have very high volumes of comments, which might be really labor intensive for agencies to process, you may really create some challenges for the system. I mean, so far, malattributed comments have not been a huge problem in the United States, but generative AI might make it much harder to detect such comments, and the agency, could potentially end up being misled by, a large campaign that's basically designed to trick them. So that is a risk of this type of tool, but this strikes me as a good venue to talk through some of those implications and how agencies might be able to build some tools to help them be resilient. Speaking of which, the regulatory agencies might use some tech tools like large language models, for example, to help them with rulemaking development. So to help them actually do some research and to synthesize large bodies of text that are already out there. The comment and analysis and response tools, they already exist in the sense that agencies in the US are taking advantage of some tools that help them identify, whether comments are duplicative, for example. But techniques like topic modeling can also help. Agencies, of course, have an obligation in the US to consider comments. And so I think the question posed by generative AI, for example, is, what does it mean if the civil servants get an assist from large language models and other tools that allow them to synthesize large bodies of text quickly? Because in our legal system, the obligation is for the agency to consider comments that are received. And so a question that we have to answer is whether having an assist from something like a large language model with topic modeling is, is it okay for the bureaucrats using that material to rely on it, or do they need to do their own analysis of the materials? So that's going to be an area that I hopefully will be writing about more in the future, and perhaps we'll get some direction from the courts on that as well over time. The next group that will take advantage of tech tools is, of course, our marvelous e-rulemaking program in the United States. I'm sure you're familiar with regulations.gov. It is the tool used by most US regulatory agencies to receive public comments. It also includes tools to analyze comments if you're in the agency. So there's a cross-agency team that governs this system with some leadership from my old office in the White House, OIRA. And this office I mentioned because they have a good track record of managing new tech challenges associated with things like mass comments. And I think as a model, this use of a number of skilled experts from across the government working together to try to solve novel challenges is just a really good model when it comes to something like a central platform like regulations.gov. Of course, generative AI is a new frontier, both in terms of how regulations.gov copes with the use of generative AI to produce large volumes of complex comments, and also building tools that might support agency analysis of those more complex and perhaps more voluminous comments that they're receiving. And finally, I want to surface some ideas that are a little more on the horizon, and that is, ways in which courts might use might use some tech tools like large language models to engage in statutory interpretation. That ends up being an important part of the US legal system, is the way that courts try to determine or discern what statutory language means and how the agencies are applying it. So there is some work being done in the contracts side of the law, and I also have a link to that work in my my final slides, that looks at the use of large language models to help come up with interpretive guides, essentially. So think about feeding, a large number of contracts into a model, and then using that information to help determine the meaning of contracts in particular. So you can think of how a similar approach could work with regulation and statutory interpretation, because this is also very, very text heavy. You could feed existing cases, for example, into a large language model that would allow the courts to get the benefit of determinations and analyses that earlier courts have done on the same or similar language. So that's an interesting notion. I'm not aware of a paper applying that idea to regulation or legislative interpretation, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time. All right, the other aspect where the courts might think about adding some tech tools is in the analysis of the record upon review. So as I mentioned, as I'm sure you're aware, there are very large volumes of materials that are produced by the regulatory process, and a lot of that gets sent to the courts for review when a rule is being challenged. And you could imagine courts looking to harness things like large language models to help them analyze those records. Of course, another option, which I didn't put on the slide, would be to have courts actually think about ways to use generative AI to draft opinions. I'm not aware that any judge has tried that yet, but if these tools really do begin to be more widespread and more reliable, perhaps you could see courts drawing on these tools to do things like summarizing materials in the record, and even potentially propose language that would ultimately make it into the judge's order. So I'm also not aware of anything written on that phenomenon or potential phenomenon yet, but I raise it because it's good to have an eye on the future and to be thinking about what could happen. So the next 2 slides I have for you are just the additional reading. So hopefully you have access to those slides if you're curious. And if not, you can always find me at The Ohio State University. And again, my name is Bridget Dooling. Thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Dooling. I think it's very interesting. We're already starting to see some patterns between presentations, and this will be helpful for discussions later. We are already seeing how these new technology or digital tools can help connect the users with regulations, even help with the mapping to avoid duplications, like Mr. Hatch presented, and how this can help both regulators and even courts, maybe, in the future to help the regulatory process. So again, I would like to open the floor if there are any questions regarding this specific presentation. Otherwise, we can always wait till the end and have a broader conversation. It will be interesting, for instance, to know if these AI tools can help also facilitate the comments, not only internally, but international comments that regulatory processes may include, with tools such as translations and also managing the amount of comments that can be received from other countries or other interested members from other countries. So let's move to the next presentation. I would like to turn now to Ms. Thalita Anthony de Souza Lima. She's the Chief Advisor for Better Regulation in Anvisa, Brazil, to present on how Anvisa has been using artificial intelligence tools in the regulatory process. So, Ms. Thalita, thank you very much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. Can you listen to me? Yes. I'm representing Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency, Anvisa, and I'm going to share with you a few panels with information about the regulations that are planned or ongoing in Anvisa, and information that we can use for a regulation, and some other tech tools that we are using with the intention of bringing more efficiency and more transparency to Anvisa's regulatory performance. First, it's necessary to briefly present Anvisa's large scope of action to show you that the use of digital tools is not only desirable, but necessary. So Anvisa is a regulatory agency whose objective is to promote and to protect population's health by regulating a wide range of products and services such as food, ingredients, labeling, cosmetics, sanitizing products, tobacco, pesticides, drugs, medical devices, healthy facilities, ports, airports, and borders, and some others. And nowadays we are about 1,600 employees, so it's not much for us to regulate, consider all that are under our surveillance. So we have a continuous effort to review and to automate process so that operations can be faster and more efficiently. So there's an office in Anvisa called the Regulatory Quality Improvement Assistant Office that I have the honor of leading for the past year and a half. And we established internal flows and solutions for good regulatory practices. And we have a small but committed team with different degrees, such as pharmacists and physicists, but they have great interest in AI and tech tools. So the panels and the information that I'm going to show you were developed for by this team. And we also tried to look at the whole cycle, the whole regulatory cycle. So we have panels and tools here regarding the planning, the first stage of the regulatory planning. And we call the main tool here, the regulatory agenda. That's a biennial instrument that contains the list of prioritized topics for Anvisa's regulatory action. And we also have some tools to the next stage of construction of regulatory intervention, where we have mainly the regulatory impact analysis, followed by the publication of resolutions. And the final step is the exposed regulations, where we have some information about the monitoring and the evaluation of the regulatory policies. And we have a lot of data that are generated at all stages of the regulatory cycle. But these data, although available, they may not be well organized. So the systematization and processing of the data by using digital technologies and IA can contribute to a more efficient performance and to predict the tendencies. So I'm going to show you 3 examples of tools that we have. So the first one we call Regulatory Observatory or Health Regulatory Observatory. We have several panels developed with Power BI platform. We also developed a chatbot that clarifies doubts about exposed regulation. And we recently developed a machine learning tool that clusters qualitative contributions that we received for the regulatory planning. So here we have our first panel. I'm sorry that the information is in Portuguese. In our website, it's only in Portuguese, but we can translate it as process monitoring panel. We have 3 tabs, 3 parts of this panel. The first one, we have general data on all planned and ongoing process at Anvisa. In this general data, we have the number of projects of process that are on the regulatory agenda. They are organized by subject, by themes, by responsible office, by reporting director, the status, such as the number of the process that were initiated, the number of process that were completed, the ones that are under regulatory impact analysis, the ones that are under public consultations. And in this panel, we also have another part with detailed information about each process. So we have a brief explanation about the scope of the process, the objective, the expected results, and the schedule with the estimated execution of each step, such as the beginning, the public consultation. So it allows stakeholders to participate in all the process. We also have a panel that brings information about the regulatory stock or the regulatory inventory that Anvisa had published since its creation in 1999. So we also have general data here. As you can see, this panel, we have the number of acts that are that are current, that are enforced. We have the average age of the regulation. We have the number of publications per year, also classified by subject, and the status, the one that have been revoked, for example. And these are available in our website. And we have another specific tab with specific information about each resolution, with the date of publication, the subject, and the specific link to the standard, to the resolution. We also published during the COVID-19 pandemic, we maintained a panel with the stock, the inventory of the standards that were published to face the emergency. So the information is available by year, by topic, by responsible office, by status. So it It was very useful for us to manage all that was published during this period. And we also developed a chatbot to clarify doubts about ex-post evaluation. We use the acronym ARR to evaluation regulatory results. So the chatbot name is Artemis. It's a girl, it's a she, and it answers questions about how to prepare an ex-post evaluation, how to execute it, but it's with restricted access to Anvisa employees. We have here a logical flow model of Artemis. So we have the salutation. Anyone can start. It was developed with Microsoft Power Virtual Agents, and it works within Microsoft Teams. So you can say, hi, Artemis in Teams, and the chatbot will answer all some doubts about definitions and how can you prepare the evaluation, how you can make your report. So it's been useful to spread this information in Anvisa. We also have some panels with information that can be used for the regulation. So here we have a panel that classifies companies by the type of activity, such as manufacturing or commerce activity, where it's located in Brazil, by states or in cities. So we have a complement panel with information about the evolution of economic activities and also the employment's relationships by year and by states. So it helps regulators to measure the impact of their acts. There's another panel with data of importation products and where they come from and the amount in reais, the number of imports and the companies that are importing in Brazil. And finally, our recent panel, we used IA and we developed a tool for grouping qualitative contributions that we received from stakeholders in a public consultation that was carried out in August and September 2023. And the consultation was for the construction of our regulatory agenda. We are still finishing the construction of the new agenda that will take place by 2024 and 2025. And the tool previously read all the contributions, the qualitative contributions that were received, about 1,500 suggestions, and the tool grouped them by semantic similarity. We use Python for data science and for natural language process, and the tool also proposed a title for the theme of each set that reflects the common context in each group. And the results that we disposed in Anvisa's website in Power BI, they reflect all the contributions that were received for the participation. So there is a word cloud with the main words, the number of the contributions, and the profile of the participants, whether it's an industry, a citizens, and the full text of the contribution. So it helped a lot for the work because instead of reading each contribution individually, we reduced the effort. So we save a lot of time in this construction. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the floor or online? I think we should just... Oh, sorry, Chile, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Agradezco a la expositora de Brasil por su excelente presentación. Solamente quería consultar si respecto del panel de acompañamiento de los proyectos regulatorios a que ella se refirió.
Can we ask you to just wait a second? We are trying to sort echo. that's preventing the interpreters from. Is it better now? Can we try again?
¿Ahora mejoró?
Sorry, maybe another mic, the one next to you. Oh.
Disculpen, para ser breve, la pregunta es si respecto al panel de acompañamiento de los proyectos regulatorios que fue mencionado, esto solamente tiene alcance a nivel gubernamental de país, o si esto también puede estar restringido, me estoy imaginando, en alguna medida sanitaria o de emergencia de salud pública en algún estado en particular, que se tenga que hacer una regulación particular para aquel estado, si también está involucrado el panel de acompañamiento de proyectos regulatorios más específicos. Muchas gracias.
Yes. Thank you. I'll give the floor to Ms. Sarita.
Solo he escuchado al final de la pregunta, pero si me comprendí bien, he preguntado si se aplica a una regulación específica, ¿sí? Esta información es para todas las regulaciones de Anfisa, no incluye las regulaciones de los estados y municipalidades, y no es solamente para emergencias. Entonces, todo que hay está planeado, está en estos paineles, y hay algunas regulaciones que ocurren por urgencia, entonces, pero la información también está allá. Si Anvisa tiene que publicar alguna resolución por urgencia, la información después va al website también.
Thank you, Ms. Sarita. Is there any other questions from the floor or online? If not, I think we should go to the next speaker. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Nikos Arkontas, Policy Officer from the European Commission, to discuss how digital tools can be used for stakeholder engagement. Mr. Arkontas, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this thematic session. Let me share with you my screen so I can really start my my presentation. Just to clarify, I'm working for the European Commission for the Secretariat General. And just a clarification, the European Commission is like the executive branch of the European Union, a union of 27 member states and more than 450 million people. So we have many specificities in the sense that we, like a government, we propose legislation, we prepare, we base our legislation on evidence, on consultation activities, targeted public, on studies, on the political, of course, on the political direction of our political masters. And also this legislation has to be also approved by the co-legislators, the council, which represents the states, and the parliament, which represents the peoples of the European Union. So we have many specificities. One of the most important one being that we have to translate basically the majority of our questionnaires and our consultation activities to 23 languages plus English. So the specificity is that we have to use multilingual tools which enable us to publish and receive comments from 27 member states and from the world, actually, because it is open to everybody, and receiving also comments and contributions to 24 languages, the official languages of the European Union. So that was the clarification. Let me proceed with the digital tools we use. Here you can see the orange circle is our external, is the front office of our interaction with the citizens and the stakeholders, which is called Have Your Say. It is a web portal. And sorry to interrupt my presentation. Another clarification is that I'm talking about the public consultation and not the targeted consultation activities. The difference is that the targeted consultation activity, you may have more traditional tools, except for the digital tools, which might be an interview, face-to-face sessions, thematic sessions, workshops with stakeholders and citizens, panels. So we use also a very large spectrum of activities and methods to try to attract and have a better understanding of the impact of our legislation, potentially future backward-looking or forward-looking for stakeholders and citizens. So I'm just saying in the end, this is about the public consultation in principle, what I'm talking about. So we have the Have Your Say. This is a single entry point for all consultation activities of public, interest, which is linked to the Better Regulation portal. This is the back office. It is an internal tool which supports the Have You Say external front office. And this, the BRP, the Better Regulation portal, the back office, is linked to the Decide planning entry, because each initiative in the Commission needs to get approval from the commissioners and the president, and in general from the hierarchy, whether it is administrative or political, depending on the type of the act and depending on the type of the initiative. So this is an internal tool which is linked to the Better Regulation portal, which is in principle linked to the Have You Say, where you can see all the consultation activities. Another smaller tool, this is with what we call EU survey tool. This is an external tool which enable DGs to draft a questionnaire which is going to be published on Have Your Say web portal. I'm calling it external because everybody can use this EU survey tool and draft and establish a questionnaire to be used on a particular website. So just for you to understand, just a clarification of how our system of consultation works. First of all, it is feeding the policy-making side from the inception to the implementation and to the evaluation. So it is a part of, we use these consultation activities throughout the policy-making side, from the inception of an idea to the legislative process and to the implementation, and then a few years later during the evaluation exercise. So we, at the initial phase of the policy-making cycle, we have the call for evidence system. We do publish a document with the objectives, the problem to be solved, and the ideas which we have as to solve this problem. And we do provide some options, some potential solutions that we are going to evaluate during the impact assessment exercise. So we publish this document which actually tells the public the Commission's intention to deal with a particular problem. We publish this document for 12 weeks, basically, by default. And this document may be accompanied, and in most of the cases it should be accompanied by a public consultation, which is a more structured consultation activity based on a questionnaire, which is again open for 12 weeks. A clarification, the document and the public consultation questionnaire could be published at the same time, or The consultation activity of the questionnaire could be launched at a later stage, depending on the preparedness of the Directorate General, which is responsible for this initiative. So this is what we have about the initial phase, 12 weeks, published document, and we receive some feedback comments without any possibility for the public to answer questions. And on the other side, we have the public consultation, which is based on the questionnaire, and there we receive some contributions from citizens and stakeholders. So at a later phase, let's say that we have prepared all the studies and the Commission is going to adopt, not to approve, because we cannot vote. The legislation is taking effect when the Parliament and the Council is voting for the legislation. But let's say that the Commission, like an organization, the executive branch, adopts and proposes officially to the co-legislator a particular text. So once we adopt, once we approve, let's say, our text, the Commission, we publish it on our website for 8 weeks, and for 8 weeks. So in that sense, before we send it to the co-legislators, it is the final phase of some comments which can be, received. And the same is true about the secondary legislation acts, which are the delegate implementing acts. I'm not going to tar you with details of what it's about. Let's say the secondary legislation acts, and there we publish the final text for 4 weeks for transparency reasons. So because citizens and stakeholders should be aware of what we are proposing and what we are adopting, but again, for them to, like a final call, for them to have a say. So this is the whole policy cycle, where throughout the policy cycle we launch consultation activities. Some figures which are very interesting. Since August 2018, we have received more than 2,500,000 public consultation contributions. We have received more than 186,000 feedback comments for documents published on the Have Your Say web portal, and more than 400,000 feedback comments for legislative proposals. So it's a huge exercise. It requires a lot of human resources, a lot of financial resources, because it's the specificity being that we are a union of peoples and member states, so we need also to translate all these texts and comments so we can understand what the citizens are saying to us. And another interesting piece of data, it might be interesting for you, we have received since August 2018 more than 400,000 comments and contributions from third non-EU countries. So basically 12% of all our feedback and contributions come from non-EU countries on our Have Your Say web portal. So it's open to everybody, because of course, obviously, you have some stakeholders impacted by our legislation throughout the world. So it is our obligation to hear also these voices as well. Some interesting, numbers, because I want you to understand the size of the work which is behind the scenes. We have received the most popular public consultations. One of them is deforestation and forest degradation in 2020, which received more than 1 million contributions. And now I have on this slide, you can see that we have published more than 360 legislative proposals under the von der Leyen Commission mandate, and more than 1,000 delegated and implementing acts throughout this period. So, it's the Have Your Say is really it's really a sync entry point. Every 12 hours, citizens and stakeholders have the possibility to impact, in a sense, the policy making side of the Commission, because every 12 hours we have another opportunity for citizens to be engaged in the policy making, and every 3.5 days a new public consultation questionnaire is launched on the same website. As I mentioned before, more than 85% of the questionnaires are translated into all EU official languages. And of course, all call for evidence documents are translated into all EU languages. And the comments we receive it is absolutely normal for people to comment on their own languages. So we do receive comments from all EU official languages. OECD has praised our better regulation system, and for the second consecutive year period, we are ranked as first in the stakeholder engagement. So what happens afterwards? So afterwards, I think we'll have some time later in the session to answer more, detailed questions. But as a first idea is that we do analyze the contributions, and we try to publish the results in the summary report within 8 weeks of the end of the consultation activity, and then a more detailed synopsis report when the proposal and the initiative is accompanied with an impact assessment. And when it comes to the evaluation, so you have a staff working document where we analyze and we try to evaluate the legislation which which took into effect some years ago, and to see how it works. So, and we take into consideration the stakeholders and the citizens, ideas. This is not to be presented now. This is additional content for you to understand how the Have Your Say works, and I hope you can see it once you receive it. So that was for me just clarification also that we also use a tool for the analysis of the contributions of the European Commission, because we receive many contributions in general. So we do have the CODA tool, which kind of helps the Directorate Generals to analyze the contributions and the comments of the citizens. So this is it provides some feedback on the sentiment, whether it is negative, whether it is positive. Of course, another issue which should be also tackled and addressed is the organization of campaigns. So this is another challenge to try to identify campaigns and try to deal with them. But last but not least, we have also to remember that the consultation activities and the results and the findings are just a piece of the jigsaw. We are not basing 100% our policy making on the stakeholders' opinions and views and on the citizens' sentiment, of course. We have other considerations like political considerations, studies, literature reviews, implementation reviews, and also the political, the measure, the cost and benefit, the measurements, etc. So it's just one piece of the jigsaw, which should not really retain that we do policy making based absolutely 100% on the consultation activity. It's just a very important piece of information and a very important piece of input. And this is what I would like to stress. So I hope I can answer and we can engage in a very fruitful discussion afterwards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Arcontas, and hopefully I pronounce your last name correctly. Probably not. Sorry for that. So again, the floor is open for questions, either in person or online. I don't see any flags, so we'll get back to it at the end. I will now like to turn to Ms. Rosie Rogers, Advisor in Australian Office of Impact Analysis in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, to present a practical case study of a digital tool used in Australia in the impact analysis process. Ms. Rogers, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'll just share my screen quickly with everyone. So thanks so much for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be speaking. My name is Rosie and I'm presenting today on behalf of the Office of Impact Analysis in the Australian Government Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Sorry, there appears to be an echo. And are other people getting an echo?
We don't have an echo from the room, but if you do, perhaps we can check.
No, that's okay. I can just so I'd like to talk to you all today about a particular piece of software my office has developed and how it enables us to improve decision making in relation to new regulation. I wanted to start off with an overview of the Office of Impact Analysis, our role in the Australian government. So we have 4 key functions as outlined here on the slide, which are administration, assistance, assessment, and accountability. So the OIA is responsible for administering the Australian government's RIA system and ensuring high quality impact analysis accompanies government decisions. We assess which new policies and regulations are significant enough to require impact analysis, which is how we refer to RIA in the Australian government. In our assistance role, the OIA works with government departments and agencies to scope the scale and magnitude of the problem that new regulation is seeking to address. We help them to consider all viable options to address the problem, including non-regulatory options. We help ensure high quality impact analysis and evidence supports decisions on new regulations, and we provide advice, guidance, and training to departments on RIA requirements and process. The OIA also completes a comprehensive assessment of every RIA that is prepared for decisions. And finally, we publish all RIA that's prepared on our website to allow for public accountability and scrutiny of the decision-making process. So that's our role in a very brief overview. As part of our role, the OIA is required to make an assessment of the RIA requirements for every single government policy and regulation that comes forward. As you can imagine, this is a lot of policy and a lot of assessments. We're quite a small team relatively. I think we work with roughly about 17 people usually. So that's a lot of policy for that size of team to cover. So for many years, we tracked our assessments and the development of RIA with a simple case folder structure, which had a lot of drawbacks. So in 2021, we decided to develop a case management system to track, organise and record each of the assessments in a systematised way. And this is how Orca was born. So Orca stands for OIA's RIA Compliance and Assessment software. So I'd like to talk briefly now about what the system does and how it operates within these 3 themes. So monitoring the RIA process, filing and record keeping, and data insights. Ooh, sorry. So the Orca system, in terms of monitoring the RIA process, the Orca system allows us to create a timeline and record for each new regulation that comes forward. We can see whether RIA is required for each policy, and if it is, where it's up to in the development process. Each policy or regulation is given a reference number, which can then be used across government to verify the policy is meeting its RIA requirements. In terms of filing and record keeping, along with this record of RIA compliance, the Orca software also tracks files all incoming and outgoing correspondence between our office and relevant agencies on particular policies. So each case which is associated to a particular regulation will have a timeline of correspondence, which shows the history of advice provided and the development of the required RIA. Meeting notes, phone calls, and emails can all be tracked and stored against the relevant case. The final feature is data insights. So the Orca software tracks and provides summaries of the OIA's engagement with each and every government agency. So we get insights into things like how many proposals each agency sends us, how many RIAs each agency is completing, and the quality of the RIAs that are completed by each agency. These data lists can be organised by agencies, they can be organised by portfolio areas, they can be organised by RIA requirements, and many, many more fields. So all these features and functions are really great, but I think what's important to talk about is how these functions help OIA fulfill our function and contribute to better regulation and decision making. So I'd like to map across the various functions of the software onto the OIA's key responsibilities to demonstrate how this technology helps OIA complete our role more effectively. So we've got our 4 A's there that we started with. So in our role of administering the Australian government's RIA requirements, Orca helps us to improve our efficiency in record keeping and tracking correspondence. What we previously had to do manually, moving emails and documents into file structures, is now all automated, leading to more record keeping, less human error, and less time spent on such tasks. It also allows us to provide quicker responses to agencies we work with, quicker assessments, and greater overall engagement with these agencies. In our assistance role, the stockpile of examples and precedents that the software allows us to access, it allows us to give agencies relevant and tailored information and examples of past RIA, which is tailored to the particular policy that they're working on. And this stockpile will only grow larger as we continue to use the system. As I said, it was developed in 2021. We've actively started using it in 2022, so it's still a relatively young system, but the longer it's in place, the bigger that stockpile of precedents and example grows. The data collection tools built into the system also allow us to investigate whether agencies may require extra support and training to lift their skills and knowledge in the RIA process. In our assessment role, Orca provides bespoke assessment tools, which allow us to provide a more granular and consistent assessment of each RIA that comes forward. We can also then provide more information to agencies on the quality of the RIA that they produce and how it compares across the Australian government. So they can take this information and make more informed decisions about their own capacity and capability building. Finally, in our accountability role, the Orca system gives us greater consistency and access to all past assessments, to all past RIA, and all past correspondence around those cases and the RIA prepared in a very easy to search system. It also ensures that no assessments, no emails, no documents fall through the cracks. So nothing gets lost in personal inboxes or isn't filed properly. Everything is stored and accessible automatically with very minimal room for human error. So the OIA have been sharing copies of the software with interested counterparts internationally since it was developed, and we're really happy to engage in discussions with any interested parties in regards to sharing a copy of the software. My email address is on the screen for anyone who would like to reach out in regards to accessing a copy of the software or more generally for other questions. And our website is also listed for anyone who would like to know more about the role of the OIA and what we do. So I'll stop there. Thank you all for listening. And I'd love to answer some questions if there are any.
Thank you. Is there any? Yeah, I can see United Kingdom in the room. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Diego. It was really interesting to hear the presentation. In the UK, we have a similar requirement to have an impact assessment accompanying our policies. So I guess I was wondering if there's been any cross-cutting themes that have emerged from this data insights function, as well as how does the system sort of work with more urgent policy proposals, whereby regulators might want to move quickly, and whether that sort of still works for them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for those questions. So I'll answer them one after the other. So the first question, forgive me, could you repeat your first question?
Sure, just whether you have had cross-cutting themes emerging from your data insights function.
Yeah, we have, thank you, great question. We have had a few common themes that pop up, particularly in the quality of the analysis that is prepared by various agencies. We find, so our RIA framework is framed around 7 core questions. I won't waste everyone's time going through them, but we have found in that data tool, it's really confirmed what our suspicion was previously, that across the board, the question that agencies struggle to answer the most is how will the regulation be implemented and evaluated? So in our system, RIA is prepared when the policy is introduced. So at the start of the regulation, before it comes into effect, the RIA is produced to inform a decision on whether that particular regulation should be introduced or not. And we find that at that very early stage, agencies haven't looked forward to how they will evaluate that policy, 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the track. They struggle to provide clear information around how they'll go through that process. So yeah, we have had some reoccurring issues pop up that we can really see through the data about which sections of the RIA agencies tend to perform most strongly in and tend to struggle with, which has been really beneficial for us. It's given us a very concrete thing that we can point at to say, we're clearly lacking as a government in this particular area, and we can focus our outreach and our training with agencies to help them improve in that particular aspect of RIA. Forgive me, could you repeat your second question? Oh, sorry, if things have to move quickly. So we find it in relation to the system, when regulators and policies have to be introduced quite quickly, the system is actually very beneficial in that it allows for quicker communication and better. We're not wasting time trying to find the relevant document, trying to find that email we sent a week ago type thing. It's all there. It's very easily accessible. So it really cuts down on the time that we spend with those fiddly little administrative tasks, which really enabled us to get into the development of the RIA much more quickly in those time-sensitive examples. I hope those answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question either from the room or online? If not, we can go to the presentation of Dr. Lu Ding, Deputy Director of Standards and Test Center of Instrumentation Technology and Economy, Institute of China, to talk about standard digital transformation and the practice in smart manufacturing. Dr. Lu, please, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Lu Ding from China. Today, I will share some ideas about standard digital transformation and the practice in smart manufacturing. I'm from Instrumentation Technology and Economy Institute of China, and I'm the Vice Chair of IEC SC65E and the convener of several working groups in IEC. As you know, with the development of technology, we mentioned a lot about setting up a digital or electric and connected society. And the standard is a strong basis for such development. But the traditional standard cannot meet the requirement of digital economy development because it has several challenges need to be fit. First, efficiency. The original paper standards is difficult. It needs people to read and to understand and then to use. So the efficiency is quite low. And the coordination, if several people want to coordinate based on standard for several certain tasks, it will be a little challenge. And if you want to integrate the standard into some system, information system, and you want the machine understand the standard, the content of standard, that will be very difficult. Therefore, we mentioned a lot about the standard digitalization or the smart standard. In ISO IEC, it was written in some basic strategies such as IEC Master Plan, ISO Strategy 2030. Both of these documents mention about the needs of digital transformation of standards. And on some regional or a national level, the digital transformation of standard is also included in the standards strategy, such as in Elect, Europe, and also in some countries like US, Germany, UK, and also in China. And in ISO IEC, there are lots of activities about such target. In IEC SMB, it restarted SG12 on digital transformation and system approach. So it started the discussion about the concept, the reference model, the information model about the standard digital transformation. And the IEC CB, it established a task force on smart standardization and conformity assessment. In IEC MSB, it organized, developed a social and technology trend report on smart standards to analyze the market need for the standard digitalization. And in ISO, it established a machine-readable standard strategy advisory group in 2018 and launched ISO Smart project, including use case, business model, technical solution, have some pilot project in this topic. Maybe some of you are not familiar with such idea, so I will introduce briefly. So for this such kind of smart standard or standard digitalization, we usually in ISO IEC we organize it in 5 levels. So first level 0, is a paper format for the standards, and level 1 is open digital format such as PDF. We use a lot in our daily life. And level 2 is a machine readable document. It will have some structured content of standard document, and the content can be processed by software such as XML format. And for level 3 is machine readable and executable content. It has semantic enrichment of content for selective access. And it will receive content of multiple standards for a given purpose. So on this level, machine could understand what is written in the standards and could execute some functions. On level 4 is a machine interpretable content. It will have information modeling that express the content and the relation between different elements, and it could have automatic question answering or predictive content supply. So on this level, you could have more intelligent functions based on standard. And for the level 3 and the level 4, we call it smart standards. So it's also, we have lots of tools and pilot project in China as well. We developed an official digital standard tool, which is placed on SAC website. It's called a standardization tool. It has several different functions, like the editor. You can edit your standard or your draft based on such tool, and you could search for related content or terms or some requirements from current standards or some document. And it could be a reader to read a different format of standards and different documents, and could resolver to transfer the from Word PDF to some structured items. And it could be accurate to accurate according to some algorithm, and it could be some scanner, and it can generate some knowledge map to provide more intelligent service. And here are some also some pilot project based on this smart standard. First one is from industrial automation. Since the standard is an important source of technical data and integrated with applications. Here we use the CDD, the Common Data Dictionary standards as a basis, and it will describe the data description of different device in the factory, such as the flow meter, including the size, the function, the location. It will have a long list. So in the national standard, Chinese national standard for this topic, it has more than 1,000 pages. This standard want to be used in digital factory, so we have a digitalized standard based on database. It could have software call, parameter comparison, answer query, and support decision-making functions. And all of this data is stored in a digital resource base to support to set up a digital factory. And all of this well based on the interoperable and thematic based digital standard to provide support to the life cycle workflow and the supply chain. And another pilot project is in a power industry. There's a local company called China Southern Power Grid, construct a standard knowledge base and knowledge domain map for the main grid equipment, and establish a standard digital platform, implement advanced applications such as digital reading, intelligent retrieval, knowledge recommendation, knowledge Q&A, and differential comparison of standards, and digital standard compilation. So that helps expert and the companies a lot in the standard progress. And another pilot is in aviation industry. So here, the digital transformation of aviation standardization is driven by the need of digitalization in this area, such as some software like DPD, the digital product definition, PDM, product data management, and digital manufacturing integrated logistic support. So in this way, they can integrate the digital standard in the especially in the design phase to help support for the expert to design some component or the product. So that helps a lot based on this digital tool. So that's all for my sharing. Thank you for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lu. Is there any questions in either on the floor or online? If not, we can move towards our last but not least speaker, Mr. Angus Barry, Head of Data Transformation in the UK's Government Better Regulation Executive, to talk about publishing machine-readable regulation. Please, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Diego. And good morning, everyone. My name's Angus Barry. I'm the head of data transformation at the Better Regulation Executive in the UK government. I'm really talking a bit about making regulations machine readable to bring down the costs of compliance with those regulations and support international trade agreements. So regulation can spur innovation, but it inevitably introduces some costs of complying with that regulation. And various research suggests that cost is about 2 to 4% of total revenue for firms, obviously depending on the sector and depending on the size of the firm. Now, some of those costs are inevitable. The action of complying with regulation does itself introduce costs, but also many of those costs are associated with just understanding what you need to do to comply with regulation. So search costs by looking across different regulators who may be publishing their regulations in different places and then understanding that content itself. Our research suggests that about 94% of businesses in the UK economy pay for support to do that. So we're trying to bring those costs down. And RegTech firms, regulatory technology firms, are a big part of that and can bring down those costs of compliance. But the more complex and more opaque regulation is, the harder it is for them to do so. So one of the RegTech firms we spoke to had a team of about 10 people on their technical team building their RegTech products and about 30 content people who were just tracking regulator websites to understand what was changing on a day-to-day basis. So we're aiming for a world in which it doesn't take 30 people, and across every RegTech firm probably has their own team doing that, just keeping track of what regulation is. So if people need to follow regulations, which are published in many different places, it used to be 69 regulators. We're at last count, we're at 80 regulators, each published in different places. Then we can use digital products and data standards to provide businesses with a simple list of regulations they need to comply with to carry out a particular action. And for international trade teams who are trying to negotiate a trade deal on a particular thing, we can give them a particular list of regulation related to that negotiation. So if it's, for example, animal welfare standards, having an easy way of them finding all regulations on the statute books which relate to that. We've carried out some user research on this. So, for example, we spoke to some farmers about regulations in the agricultural sector, and they said things like, I just want a list of things I have to do to be able to keep chickens, to be able to keep pigs. They don't want to have to navigate many different organizations to try and work out what's relevant to them. You know, the same for a construction firm who wants to build a house, or a medical technology firm which wants to create a new medical device. Now, that kind of user need is very familiar for us in the digital world. Those kind of user-centered design principles, which Jordan spoke about at the start. So we should apply them in the regulation space. So as a description of what we mean by machine readability, and this very much relates to Dr. Ding's presentation just beforehand, we mean three things. So firstly, well-structured metadata, which is consistent across regulators. So a consistent description of who's published a regulation, what's its legislative origin, is it a draft, what are the keywords associated with it, dates, basic information like that, published in a consistent way across the regulatory space. Secondly, using open document formats, so ODF rather than PDF, for example. And thirdly, marking up that content. And very close to Dr. Ding's presentation, the way we think about it is 3 levels of markup. So firstly, you've got basic structural markup. We use HTML rather than XML, but I think we can probably resolve that difference. Which just says, you know, this is a title, this is a paragraph, this is an annex. The next level up from that is semantic markup. So to try to get some of that legal meaning into the machine readability of the document. So can versus should versus must, and the legal meaning of the legislation it relates back to. And then thirdly, this kind of vision of rules as code, which I'll come back to later in terms of how far we can go with that. So as an example of what this can look like, every piece of UK legislation is published with the same consistent metadata and with the content structured in markup rather than just raw content. And what that means is that you can search through that content incredibly easily. So, for example, when we left the European Union, quite quickly we had to find every single piece of legislation which related to EU law. Now, that would have been thousands and thousands of people hours to search manually through that. But because it was structured with consistent metadata and marked up content, it took one person one day to find every piece of legislation we needed to consider on leaving the EU. So we want to do the same for regulation. So that if you're doing a VAT-free trade agreement, you can search very easily for every regulation relating to what you're negotiating on. So what does that look like in practice for regulation? Now, there's already lots of data standards which already describe digital objects. We're not talking about creating something entirely brand new. We're talking about taking existing well-recognized standards for describing digital objects and applying them to a regulation space. And in particular, I think Dublin Core is probably the best, most established one. It's an ISO standard, and we found it very suitable for describing regulation. And so this is how we've started working on it. This is a worked example of our attempt to mark up and provide consistent metadata for a regulation document. Now, behind that, the document itself will look exactly the same, but there'll be complete information about it and the content structured in that machine-readable format. So Bridget spoke about the potential of AI and large language models. Our hypothesis is that more machine readable we make our documents, the greater the potential for that generative AI and large language models to use those regulation documents. So to go back to that point about how far can we push this kind of rules as code approach, if we want to go even further than semantic markup, one of the furthest examples in the UK, at least, where we've gone is our road regulator, which has essentially codified the regulations relating to the design of roads, so that if you're designing a road on your design software, it can integrate with the regulation itself. So, for example, the angle of the camber of a road, you don't need to manually look that up in a regulation. It is codified in the markup, and so that can integrate with your software and say the angle is correct or the angle is not correct, so that your software can automatically tell you whether your designs are adhering to regulation or not. In conclusion, we'd really like to talk about this internationally. I think a lot of countries are interested in adopting these kind of standards. We've had great conversations with Japan already about it, and Canada too, who are doing similar work in their governments. I'm sure lots of other countries are also thinking about this. And I suppose that vision of regulations published in that user-centered way with machine readability, which to bring down that cost of compliance and to facilitate international trade negotiations, so that we know the regulatory landscapes in each country, so we can compare them and then use them for international trade negotiations. Really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. Is there any specific questions about this presentation, or should we just move on to the general Q&A section? So we can go straight to the Q&A. I would like to open a more broad debate with the active participation of all delegations, either here or through Zoom, and I'll switch to Spanish. En las presentaciones vimos una serie de elementos comunes y las dificultades que la gran cantidad de datos genera en los procesos regulatorios. Y esto es particularmente complicado para algunos países en desarrollo y menos adelantados, dadas las limitaciones estructurales para procesar esta información. Y aunque estas herramientas digitales podrían ayudar, no siempre están disponibles para estos países, por lo que para iniciar el debate, y luego abro el piso para cualquier pregunta, quisiera insistir en nuestra tercera pregunta guía sobre cuáles son las dificultades y las posibles soluciones para los países en desarrollo, en particular los PMA, puedan utilizar estas herramientas y tecnologías digitales. Y con eso, como primera pregunta, abro el piso y veo a Australia.
Thank you. Sorry, I was looking to ask another question of the panel. I didn't have an answer for your question on the LDCs, so I'll come back later.
No, please. The question was for the panelists as well. So we'll build a list and then we'll hand the floor to them.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Well, in that case, sorry, I've received a question from someone online that I'm looking to read through correctly. And I think it's very relevant given a range of panelists identified various tools that different members are using to incorporate digital tools into our processes and make them easier. But I'd be interested to know then how the panelists can comment on the approach to ensuring that regulators actually have the skills required to use these technology and tools so that they can deliver upon the potential benefits that they offer. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Australia. ¿Alguna pregunta más en el piso o online antes de pasar la palabra a los oradores? No, entonces pasamos la palabra a los oradores. Si alguno quisiera comenzar. Perhaps we can go in the same order of the speakers, and I'll hand the floor to Mr. Jordan, if you have answer for these questions.
So the need for strong digital and data capability in regulators is something that we've been looking at as a prerequisite to be able to deliver on those opportunities. For us, there are a couple of areas we've been looking at to start with. The first has been looking at how we can better connect together regulators who are working on similar digital and data issues. And that reflects a lot that many of these issues are common. We've been working on establishing a RegTech community of practice in our digital profession, and that being a bit of an information sharing network, but also a forum for events and for problem solving, and to just bring together like-minded regulators trying to solve similar issues. We're also really interested in how that could be built upon to look at more professional development, particularly for regulators who may work in a policy area where their regulated entities are being quite rapidly affected or by technology or adopting technology, and that's changing the nature of the risk. So I think in the presentation of the UK, talking about the adoption of RegTech by the regulated, a lot of that is sort of augmenting the role of regulators, because that adoption of RegTech can potentially realize harm in different ways to previously, or at different scales or different paces to previously. So that's sort of forcing regulators to think about, do they have the right skills to manage the similar kinds of risks in a new context? And then the third is really around how do you, I think in my presentation I talked a bit about how do you bring together technologists and policy makers and regulators into the same context, looking at doing more of that, partly because it provides for good in situ experience and learning around real problems, but also because it helps bring together quite diverse perspectives and skill sets around those issues, and some of those can be really quite unique set of circumstances.
Thank you, Jordan. I don't know if Miss Bridget would like to give us an intake from either from the academia or from her past life in the administration.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what Jordan already shared. And I also agree with the sentiment of the question, which is to, insist that it's not enough to just buy new tech and drop it in. You have to actually have people there who are capable of working with it and understanding both its possibilities and its limitations. So I don't think any one member of staff can be responsible for all of that. I think it has to be, the entire organization having some awareness about things like that. So, I mean, one tactical way to think about it might be to think about, building systems internally, like those that we've heard about today, because that gives the staff a chance to play a role in the development of these systems and actually learn more about things like system architecture and limitations to what they're building. So I don't necessarily, I'm sure it is the case that that we need to hire people with more technical backgrounds, but I also think existing staff can be brought along and sort of trained on the job if they're part of the development process for some of these tools themselves.
you very much, Ms. Dalita.
I think the challenges are similar, as you can see from the presentations, and the use of tech tools, it must be a priority of the organization. You must have, it helps if you have a structure, an office, someone that thinks about it, that can look for the solutions. And also you have to identify the profiles and train the team. We have a very small team, 2 or 3 persons, but we are developing all these solutions. So I think this kind of opportunities for us to get to know what is already available and helps a lot. So we don't need to pass for the stage of creation. So it's possible.
Thank you very much, Ms. Argondas.
We do need layers of staff. For instance, as you say, we need a specialist IT layer, but also it is inevitable that we need some intellectual work behind, all these contributions and comments, because at the end of the day, some citizens and some stakeholders have self-selected themselves to participate in a consultation activity. So for the first layer, we do have the technical staff, IT staff, specialists, developers, etc. And who enable all this system to talk to each other. But also we do have another layer of administrative, staff who are going ultimately to be aware of the contributions, the content of the activities. To be able to we have a lot of training sessions, either online and physically. We do have some training session about how these systems work, especially for the Directorate General staff. And just to remind you that I work in the Secretariat General of the Commission, who is responsible for the horizontal coordination of the better regulation agenda. But each Directorate General, let's say, like the ministry, let's say, in the national government, let's say, that each Director General has its own staff to deal with this intellectual work and the technical work. But the coordination is on us. So basically, at the end of the day, we do need an IT layer and another layer which is going to read and analyze the contributions with the help of digital tools. But as you know, regulation cannot be machine produced, so we need also some mental exercise on this.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
Thanks. I think it's a really important question to consider. It's all well and good to design excellent digital tools to help regulators and the regulated further understand regulation. But if they're unable to use those tools, all of the benefits suddenly disappear quite quickly. And I think one thing that I discussed in relation to the UK delegation's question is something we've learnt from our system and the data insights it's provided, is that in the development of our regulation in Australia, we need to pay more attention to the implementation and evaluation of those regulations at the initial design point. And I think that same concept can be applied to the design of these technological tools as well. I suppose the logical flow or order of thinking would be to develop the tool, to roll it out to regulators and the public, and to then think about ways to train them in its use. But if we sort of interrupt that flow a little bit and think about ways to train those who will use the tools when we are designing the tool right at the start, I think that introduces a lot more possibility to make those technologies more user-friendly. Something we do with the quite small scale system that I discussed is we have a sandbox version available of the tool for new employees to practice in, I suppose. And that was something that when we were designing the technology, the system, we thought was really important. So there was a space that people could learn and make mistakes and engage with a practice version of the software without that fear of making mistakes in a working version of the policy that they're working on. So I think it's really important to foreground those considerations of how are we going to teach and train in this technological tool when it is being designed to allow for inclusion of training considerations in the actual product itself, rather than just the way it's communicated once it's rolled out.
Thank you very much. Now I hand the floor to Dr. Ding.
I fully agree with the opinions from the previous experts, and I think as for such digital technology and tools, it will be much helpful, especially for the standardization fields. Based on such kind of digital tools could make the usage, inquiry, interaction of standard become more convenient. And if there are some low-cost such tools, even maybe it's free, it will be greatly improve the standardization level, especially for the developing countries. But of course, there will be lots of challenge will be met in such process. First, just several experts also mentioned about the lack of professionals. They should have a comprehensive ability. So in terms of standard digitalization, future expert could not only need to have a standardization knowledge, but also need to know the digital tools, how to use them, and how to understand the probability of standardization, and how to apply it to specific work. And such a kind of expert is not easy to train. And second, the lack of awareness of the standard digitalization, because it is still a new thing in maybe quite a long time. It still needs some effort to let all the people accept these ideas, and the idea itself also need to be optimized and improved. So it will need some time to change the ideas and the habit. And third, the digital some infrastructure or basic tools interface are not quite sound. If you want to really realize the standard digitalization, you need not only such kind of digital tools, and also they need to have some common interface, some information model. In this way, we can achieve the cross-domain data interaction, to understand each other, and to make it a promotion to the different industries. And also the management mechanism is also need to be improved, because with such a new idea come out, it requires lots of new regulation, management, or mechanism behind to support it, such as data sovereignty of standards and data network security during the transmission, and the traceability of the during the use process. In this way, the digitalization standard could be utilized and controllable. So in this way, we need to have more training to the expert, to the who joined involved in the standards, and we also to accelerate related research, and also the standard development of such common infrastructure and basic ideas. And also we need to set up a better management mechanism to support such kind of digitalization. Okay, then thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duding. Mr. Angus?
I have a really interesting question. If we look at the 80 regulators in the UK, there are vastly different sizes and vastly different levels of digital maturity. So some of them have well over 1,000 people, whole digital functions doing digital product delivery within one regulator. But if you look at some of the others, they've got about 10 people. They don't have any digital specialists. They don't really know where to start with digital product delivery. So one of our roles is to try and encourage collaboration across those 80 organizations. So when those bigger regulators are building digital products, they're building them to be used either directly as kind of a platform shared amongst regulators, or at the very least building them in an open source way. So to your question, Diego, as well, I think there's real opportunities for open source here. We had a kind offer from Rosie previously about their case management system. Every case management product, every regulation publication product, and every consultation product I've seen has basically got the same basic functionalities. They've got different branding, but they all do essentially the same things. So it feels like there's a real opportunity for open source of these products and to collaborate internationally on building them, some of these products together and reusing them. Thanks.
Thank you, Angus. And that gives me excellent starting point for our next question, unless there's another one from the floor. UK.
Thank you. I might ask a couple, actually, if I may. It's really clear that digital tools can help reduce barriers to trade for businesses and especially small businesses. But how can we get these businesses on board with digital tools which identify which regulations are relevant to them? I'm just thinking, considering kind of regulations about data sharing, how do we make sure kind of small businesses or even large businesses are happy to share information that can then help relevant regulations find their way to them? And then another recurrent theme that I picked up on was on retrospective reviews of regulations. How can we use these insights, these extra insights that we're gaining from digital tools to help us learn lessons about reducing unnecessary barriers for businesses? Thank you.
Thank you. For the first question, I think I will hand the floor to Ms. Duding, that spoke a little bit about how AI can help connect the users with the actual regulations. Maybe you can have an insight on this, but then all the other speakers can jump in. And so please, Ms. Duding.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the extra time to talk about this because I agree that the issues of data sharing and making sure that you have, the consent of people to use their data in order to, figure out which kinds of regulations are going to be useful or interesting to them. I agree that the data sharing issue is the elephant in the room, is the big thing that we have to think about. So, I mean, the way I would think about this, although I'm really interested to hear from the other experts as well as folks, in the room, is to think about other times when you are engaging with those entities and thinking about trying to, work some kind of consent process into the mix. So what I was envisioning was a tool where, it just sort of operates in the background. So say you give the tool, you as an individual, a business owner or a member of the public, allow this tool to see your Instagram feed or to see, more about some of the commercial transactions you do, with the idea that it's keeping an eye on that for the purpose of, and I think this is the critical issue, for the purpose of actually helping you determine which regulations, might be relevant to your life. So the example that I've given in an earlier paper was the idea of, if you're somebody who loves being outside and being in the woods and you go camping, you like to watch birds, you can probably tell that somebody likes to do those things based on their transaction records, say, renting campsites or, buying certain camping gear or binoculars or birding books, right? So there are these fingerprints that we leave behind when we buy things. Of course, I would have to have agreed that I want such a tool to observe my behavior and then tell me down the line, that there's a new regulation that might restrict access, for example, to birdwatching sites at national parks, or might increase access to birdwatching opportunities in the national parks. So that all sounds very nice, except for the data sharing issues that the questioner rightly raises. And so to me, it comes down to, obtaining consent for access to data. But this is an incredibly challenging issue, and one where I'm sure that the other experts lined up here today will have perspectives on sort of how to think about, getting consent and whether that's even the right pathway for how to resolve this. But I thank you for the question. It's a very good one.
Thank you very much. Is any of the other speakers would like to take one of these questions, or both?
I will absolutely Ding if you did want to come in.
Sure. Dr. Ding?
I think it's a good question, and during this process, we will meet lots of difficulty, and also the mention about the data sharing, also the like the security, how to make sure everyone want to share the data with you, and how to make the data secure enough. So that's a challenge we need to solve for the next step. And I think the solution is still on the way, but it will be definitely very critical to such a process, and it could be considered. It must be considered in the whole roadmap of such digitalization, not only for standards but also for other regulatory area. So that's my short comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ding and Angus.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. And we see lots of digital products being created for that, both in government and in the private sector. And the ones we've seen all basically take the same form. So you as a user, you might be a business who wants to carry out an action, or you might be a trade team who want to understand regulation in the space. You'll give the service some information about yourself and what you're trying to do, and it will take a kind of decision tree model and then spit out at the end the regulations which are relevant to you. And you can either do that in a I suppose a manual content management type way. So we've seen services where you've got essentially a team of content people behind that, managing and keeping that decision tree up to date. Or you can take a more automated approach where an AI LLM model will automatically ingest various regulation documents, interpret them, and then give you your answer. I suppose the thing I think which is most important is it's very difficult to manage those content systems if we don't have well-structured regulation landscape where we actually understand what regulations are out there. So the more we can do in adopting, I would say, metadata standards for the content manual services and markup standards to get more machine readability of documents, the easier it will be to actually develop those services. At the moment, we've seen cases where people build these services and then it's just so hard to keep them live and up to date because the regulation landscape is so dispersed and complex. So the more we can do as publishers of regulation to increase consistency and clarity, the better. And then, the RegTech industry will are experts in delivering with those products which use that information. But what we've got a monopoly on is how we publish it, and publishing it in a good machine readable way.
Thank you, Angus. Jordan?
I thought I might turn to where there's shared incentives at play. And I say that because one of the things we've seen in Australia is a significant adoption of software as a service products by small businesses, particularly things like payroll software, where some of those have been driven by mandates by government, particularly around tax reporting. But the adoption isn't just a begrudging investment to meet the compliance requirements. It's actually something where the businesses themselves see the benefit from digitizing their own processes and the value that software can bring. Another example would be in agriculture, where we have a really significant adoption of ag tech products by farmers who are not buying those products and implementing them because they're doing that for any regulatory purpose. They're actually doing it first and foremost because they see value in helping them better manage their day-to-day farming activity and becoming more productive producers. It just so happens then if they have all this data, can there then be a mechanism to share that with government for the process of a regulatory decision or an approval, so that they aren't having to print everything out on paper and then go through very manual paper-based processes? So I think the best examples have been ones where there is shared incentives between the regulated entity and the regulator, but it's also one where there's been a strong mature RegTech industry in the sector that's developed, and as regulators, there's an important role to be having to maintain that relationship with the sector and really support the adoption and the good relationships, so that things like when the regulations change, the software can more easily adapt, and then in turn, the community of regulated entities who are using that software can more easily just stay up to date without having to do any deliberate change in their process.
Thank you, Jordan. I see the EU in the asking for the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for all the very interesting presentation. I have a question to the UK speaker with regard to the tool that would help businesses to learn about all the applicable regulation. It's a twofold question. On one side, how do you manage complexity arising from different levels of government regulating, including the local level? Because on your slide, I only saw the central level of government regulations that you mentioned, that is already not, not placed in one place, and it doesn't follow the same standard necessarily. So how do you address the various lower levels of regulation in country? And then the second question, it's a more general one. You mentioned briefly that you are interested to cooperate with other countries in order to actually, in an international context, help businesses for accessing markets. So if you could tell us a little bit more about those activities that you are engaging with other countries. Thank you.
It's a great question. I might pass the first one just on to others, because in the UK, we've got very central government mandates. So there isn't that much interplay with local governments who, I suppose, their area of regulation is simply just very different to the regulators we're dealing with. Maybe apart from construction, where local planning is a particularly difficult one. We haven't yet engaged with local government. I think we'd like to, but maybe, Talisa, you've got some thoughts on Brazil might be a better example for that collaboration. But on the second question about international collaboration, we're trying to obviously standardize how we publish regulations in the UK. For the purposes of international trade, there'd obviously be a great deal of benefit from doing that collaboratively, so that the way we describe our regulations is similar to the way other countries do as well, so that when it comes to trade negotiations, we can compare regulations in a much easier way. There's also a lot which is common between, very basic data standards work which isn't country specific, where we can learn a lot. So we were doing it principally through Agile Nations, which was an international regulatory cooperation group, and Japan and Canada were members of that. So that's where we first got into contact with them. I know the EU is also interested in this area too. They just weren't part of that group, so we'd love to learn more. Does that answer your question? At least the second part. Talita, I don't know if you've got thoughts on the local versus state level government.
We still need to improve this area as well. The solutions that we have in Anvisa are only for the central level, the national level. It was the question of Chile, I think. And we have different complexities and qualities of regulations in Brazil, but we have to improve that. We coordinate the system, but the digital tax and the solutions do not include them yet.
Thank you both. If there's no other questions, I would like to insist a little bit more on some of our guiding questions. Lack of awareness for this type of tools was mentioned. Also, the possibility of open source for some of these tools to expand its use to other developing countries or LDCs. I would like to know from the speakers or the floor if you can share any examples of cooperation, including through technical assistance of, as mentioned in Article 11 of the agreement, TBT agreement, between members in terms of implementing digital tools and technologies in regulatory processes. And if not, what are the potential areas and forms of cooperation that we can engage in? So if someone from the floor would like to take the questions, otherwise I'll start with the panelists. I don't think so. So perhaps we can switch things up and start from the last speaker and start with Angus that mentioned the open source opportunities.
Very briefly, I suppose that there's a lot of less. I'm not aware of as much collaboration yet in regulation products. So I suppose this is maybe the start of talking about those. But I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from other types of products where there is more international collaboration. In particular, if you look at procurement systems, and if you look at publication systems of, basically government websites, there's been a huge amount of open sourcing. There's been international collaboration to agree on particular data standards. So if you look at procurement, there's the Open Contracting Data Standard, for example, which has got really widespread adoption. If you look at government websites, a lot of different countries' websites look very similar, and that's a good thing because there's been reuse of components, reuse of design systems, and it feels like there's an opportunity to do something similar in regulation. And I would suggest that a good place to start would be the products the other panelists have talked about: case management, regulation publication, and consultation, and then something about the data standards for actually publishing the regulation itself.
Thank you, Angus. Dr. Ding?
Yeah. As for cooperation, I think for standard digitalization work, we have lots of collaboration on different levels. First of all, on the international level, we have ISO IEC, have several working group or strategy group to study about the concept, the models for the standard digitalization. And besides that, we also have some binary cooperation, such for example, between China and German, with DKE, we have some binary talk regularly to discuss about the procedure, how to promote standard digitalization and the concept, the use case selection, where this idea could be used best, which industry and which scenario. And also we talk about some tools, platforms could be used to support this idea. And also in ISO, IEC or national level, we have some pilot project. We cooperate with lots of different parties to work together to maybe first of all to have reach a consensus on the concept, on the models, on the roadmap to realize this standard digitalization, and also we exchange ideas about the digital tools platform, which one is better, and there could be maybe future we can learn from each other. So I think such cooperation is very important to promote this idea in broad range. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ding. I think Angus and Dr. Ding, when the two speakers who mentioned this, I don't want to push any other speakers. Just open the floor if any of them would like to comment on this. I see Ms. Rogers. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So like I mentioned in my presentation, the OIA, we've shared our software tool that we developed with a few counterpart governments in the Indo-Pacific region. And we've learned a lot from that sharing engagement. The first problem that we encountered was the high level of specificity in the tool that we developed. It's very specified to our particular RIA process and system, which differs somewhat from the systems of the counterparts that we've shared with. So we run into troubles there about having to work with these counterparts to find ways to sort of fit their process into our system. And so, one thing that I've talked about a bit extensively today is the importance of considering how systems will be trained and taught and shared at the initial design phase of that system. And I think that's something that we could have improved on in our development of our Orca software, thinking about designing it in ways that make it more shareable and more accessible for counterparts in the international space. I think would have been really beneficial and definitely a learning that we've taken away from the process.
Thank you very much. Is there another speaker who would like to take the floor?
I might jump
in.
Jordan. Yeah. Just to say, I think in Australia we do see, I think, a more opportunity around open source in sharing across state and territory governments, particularly where there might be regulatory digital capabilities which could be built once and then implemented, 7 or 8 other times across the rest of the country. I think we've seen that happen. We've seen many offers of it happen between jurisdictions, but we probably haven't yet seen that operationalized in a way where there's significant reuse. But one example where that's been talked about a bit is in the introduction of digital driver's licenses, where 1 or 2 states who have had larger digital teams have been able to go and build an app on your phone where you can have your driver's license available digitally, and then other jurisdictions have come along to say, well, how did you do that? Or other bits of that we can reuse. The other area where we're quite interested at the moment is where perhaps not sort of open source code, but looking at where we could create more repeatable regulatory patterns. So that might be a combination of potential regulatory approaches, business process, and potentially digital tools and technologies for a process like developing a new licensing scheme, or in using data to target compliance activity, things that are quite common across many regulators, but where it can be helpful to sort of draw them out a bit more, sort of draw a ring around it as a process, and then better build out what good practice might be, drawing upon what many others have been doing.
Thank you, Jordan. I think there are no more questions from the floor or online. So to close, I'd like to thank all the speakers for their very valuable and insightful contributions, especially to Ms. Dooling, Rogers, and all of you attending online. I know it's for the US, it's very early in the morning. For Australia, it's already very late at night, and also in China. So thank you for participating. Also for all the delegations in the floor and online for your questions. I think we have had a very enriching session. Switching to Spanish. El proceso regulatorio, como sabemos, es intensivo en datos, involucra a varias agencias y procesos, y las buenas prácticas de reglamentación contribuyen a la aplicación mejorada y eficaz del acuerdo OTC. Y pueden contribuir a evitar obstáculos innecesarios al comercio en la preparación, adopción y aplicación de medidas reglamentarias, como dijimos antes, pero a la vez aumentan la cantidad de datos y complejidad de los procesos, en ocasiones con grandes cantidades de comentarios recibidos que podrían potencialmente ser malintencionados. Las herramientas digitales pueden contribuir a facilitar el trabajo de todas las partes involucradas, incluyendo a los usuarios, para facilitar la participación en las consultas de los reglamentos y conocimientos de la normativa de interés, a los reguladores para manejar esta cantidad de información y para el monitoreo y evaluación de los reglamentos. Estas herramientas en realidad pueden ayudar en todas las etapas del proceso. Incluso vimos posibles aplicaciones para los procesos judiciales. Y escuchamos excelentes ejemplos de estas herramientas y sus aplicaciones durante la sesión. En mi calidad de moderador, presentaré un breve informe de nuestros debates durante la reunión formal de OTC en el marco del punto de orden del día sobre buenas prácticas reglamentarias. En las próximas semanas se publicará además un informe más detallado bajo mi responsabilidad. Antes de cerrar esta sesión, quisiera alguna delegación hacer uso de la palabra. Si no es así, muchas gracias a todos. Creo que este tipo de sesiones nos ayuda a improve the lack of awareness, if I may mixed a little bit, and help us all to get to know these tools and possibly implement them in our own regulatory systems. Espero que con interés nuestra próxima sesión temática centrada en la evaluación de la conformidad y el comercio electrónico, que comenzará esta tarde a las 3 de la tarde. Esta sesión será una oportunidad importante para debatir las mejores prácticas para abordar los retos relacionados con la evaluación de la conformidad de los bienes obtenidos a través del comercio electrónico y cómo los miembros pueden garantizar y mejorar la seguridad de dichos bienes. Así que nos vemos esta tarde. Muchas gracias a todos. Sorry, I will not want to close this session without also thanking the Secretariat for all their help organizing and this session, and to me particularly to make my life so much easier by trying to moderate this session. Thank you very much.